your industry strategy does not address culture, then all you're eating is breakfast. You're leaving out lunch and dinner as well. Okay, so that's very, very important in terms of mindset and automation, integration, and digital transformation, especially in a heavily regulated industry such as financial services. As humans, we always think in binary fashion, black or white. But if you look over the course of time with technology shifts in paradigm, it was never one technology moving everything forward at light speed. It was a convergence. It was a new technology built upon foundations of previous technology and converging with it as a shift. The traditional house of the bank is being nipped on one flank by the big tech players, on the other side by fintech players. But what's the common way into that house? Where are both of them attacking the traditional industry? It's through the internet browser and the endpoint, mobile. So your services need to be internet and mobile first, in my view. If you're not, then you may as well prepare to get packed up and close shop.
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. This podcast is inspired by the Wall Street Journal best-selling book with the same title, written by Workato CEO Vijay Tella. If you would like a free copy of the book, be sure to listen for a special offer at the end of today's episode. Welcome, everyone. So today is a first. So we're actually doing our first industry special. So we're taking the new automation mindset, right? So process, growth, and scale mindset, and we're looking at a specific industry. So today we're going to look at financial services. That's a big one. I mean, it's easily probably the biggest consumer of IT out there. A lot of complexity, high scale, a lot of regulatory security demands, and, financial services has been going on for a while, has been using IT for a while. So you won't have like the same kind of SaaS environment like in a modern company. There's a lot of custom built applications. So you probably have a lot of developers out there. So it's a challenging environment for sure. So to look into that environment, financial services, we invited today Bill Genovese. He's the CIO advisory partner at Kyndryl, and he's got like decades of experiences in financial services, and actually also a really nice article out there about the 6 technology accelerators currently in financial services. So Bill, first of all, welcome, and thanks for being here with us. Maybe to kick this off, you have all this experience in financial services. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, maybe there's some anecdotes, give folks in the audience a little bit of a visual of what financial services look like. Maybe if you're a CIO or CTO out there in financial services, what are you up against? How does this look like?
Well, I mean, 2 things come to mind right away, Marcus. I mean, in the first one, as you were kind of saying, anecdote a bit, in the strategies that I've developed for my companies for the industry, there's a famous quote by Peter Drucker centered around culture, okay? And this very much touches the essence of mindset in financial services and the IT industry across a number of industry verticals. And that quote is culture eats strategy for breakfast, okay? So I've kind of spun that on its heels a bit, in the sense that says, if your industry strategy does not address culture, then all you're eating is breakfast. You're leaving out lunch and dinner as well. Okay, so that's very, very important in terms of mindset and automation. Okay, integration and digital transformation, especially in a heavily regulated industry such as financial services. The other thing too that, from a reaction perspective that immediately came to mind is disruption. Okay, the traditional industry is no longer financial services owned by the traditional industry. Okay, there's regulatory guardrails, and with those regulatory guardrails and compliance mandates, sure, there's ownership, but it's been kind of a bifurcation and segmentation of a consumption model. Okay, in terms of payments has already left the traditional industry in terms of ownership. PayPal, as an example. Credit and lending no longer holistically owns to the banks. There's marketplace lenders, there's alternative lenders moving into a lot of different asset classes, specialty finance lending, auto finance. Okay. And the last bastion, which is traditionally still owned by the banks, is I call it asset preservation or securitization. It's around deposits, okay, and investments, securities, and insurance to a large extent. So, but it's become fragmented and disrupted. Okay. So, and that three-tiered consumption model has moved into adjacent industries in terms of integration and embedded finance. So,
So this is interesting. So I'm picturing this fort of financial services industry that's very traditional, as you mentioned, like culturally influenced by regulatory events, probably very conservative.
right. Risk
Maybe
averse.
not
Yep.
the fastest movers, but then now, on the outside of the fort, there's like the new barbarians are coming, and they're kind of grabbing chunks.
Yeah. Yeah,
In all
exactly.
business, is this a good way to look at it?
Yeah, you can also kind of look at it in pictorially, visually, what have you, in the sense of a fort or a house. Okay. And you have on one side of the fort or the house, you have the cloud hyperscalers, the e-commerce, the big tech giants, the Googles, the Amazons, Microsoft. Okay. On the other side, you have fintechs, point players that are functionally trying to get into that fort or house. So, and their point of attack, okay, is through specific functions. I mentioned some of them: payments, okay, and credit and lending, and so on and so forth, trading, investments. And the other side is more of an embedded finance place, starting with payments. Okay, Amazon, Google, okay, and back end integration via payments channel. But the commonality, okay, where they're trying to get in through the rooftop of the fort, alternative attack method, is through the internet consumer channel, the mobile device, the digital browser, okay, and gathering information from both sides of that fort on what is that consumer doing, okay, what is their payment behaviors, patterns, who are they paying, can they pay on time, and then both sides of that attack vector are moving further and further into the traditional floors of the bank in that house. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. Okay, well, let's take this as a backdrop, and really, what I wanted to do, like, talk about the new automation mindset again. One of the first things that we're saying in the book is really about that. There's got to be like very strong process thinking to kind of make this step in the modern world. Now, here's an interesting one, right? So I talked to an IT executive on one of the big banks. All right. And he, I started a conversation about process thinking, and he was kind of rolling his eyes, and he said, like, Markus, I mean, really, if you think of we have so many applications, right? They've been built over decades. We're just happy that things work. Nobody really knows what the process looks like exactly across all of these applications. It's like, I'm not going to touch it.
Right.
So, and I
Right.
was like, I don't know if that sounds familiar, but I was just curious about, do you see process thinking in financial services? And if so, how? Maybe what processes are most challenging? Maybe what processes are maybe you've seen the biggest success? I'm just curious. Think process and financial services. What comes to your mind?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a very good question. And, I'll kind of, at least at a certain high level, frame that up. I always get amused to some extent and interested when companies across any industry vertical say they have a robust, holistic digital transformation strategy. And then one of the next questions I ask is, what does your mobile first strategy look like? Okay. In terms of mobile devices or edge or endpoints. Okay. And then your common services to the consumer. Okay. Connecting to your enterprise. Okay. And the processes underneath that. What does that look like? Okay. Across applications, data, and platforms, both internally, behind the firewall, and then externally. So connecting in a B2C context, but also B2B and B2B2C. Okay. And largely said, those processes should be transparent enough and automated enough that they work across those three paradigms: B2C, B2B, B2B2C. In a perfect world, in digital transformation, in mobile first, not only the consumer is connected with that end-to-end service and process, but the partners are as well, as much as possible. Okay. And in a B2B context or B2B2C, that's all kind of weaved together in terms of automation. Sure. I use the
Okay.
example
Okay.
of I use the example of internet banking. Okay. And a lot of banks, went down the path of form factor fitting what they have on a browser, okay, into a mobile device. Okay. But you can't do everything on a mobile device simply as you can on an internet browser either, in terms of drill down capability and extending, depth of process and automation. Okay. So that's where you peel the onion back and say, well, you have a digital transformation strategy, you have a mobile first strategy, but what does that mobile first strategy really look like from a process perspective and automation perspective? Will the consumer get to a certain point and frustrated and said, well, I can't do this any further on my mobile device. I've got to open up my computer. Or even more drastically, from a process perspective and orchestration perspective, I've got to jump in my car on my lunch break now and go down to the branch. Frustrating.
No, totally, totally. And it seems like what you're saying, that the processes that seem to be challenging are the ones that are customer facing, that are,
Yeah.
the experience that the customer are having. I mean, you explained that Ford from the past, and then all the other players coming in. There's probably got to be some kind of an end-to-end experience across it. The mobile experience. Also the banks are, I guess, catching up to the way the internet players would provide their experiences. That kind of brings me to the underlying technology to all of this, I believe. And you spoke about this in your article, the six technology trends, open API, or like APIs, right? Because I think, the way you think about it when you say like, okay, I want to have a mobile experience and I want to have that experience maybe also with ecosystem partners. It seems to me like APIs are going to be fundamental to making that happen. How do you think about open APIs? Tell us a little bit when you put that into the six core trends for technology that's influencing financial services. What did you have in mind?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it goes back to the tiered or segmented consumption model. Okay. And largely from an open API perspective and a payments perspective, that's not totally 100% open. Okay. But for the most part, you can do and process payments from any endpoint for the most part. That's pretty open in 2024. As you get more into, from a regulatory compliance mandate perspective, on what you can and cannot do, the access to those open APIs shuts down more so. Okay. You can, as an example, the other side of the spectrum, you can do mobile deposit. You can take a picture of your check in 2024 and deposit it to your online bank account from your mobile device. Okay. Can you do exotic option trading? Okay. And swaps and things of this nature. Well, the answer there is it depends. Okay. Can you take out an insurance policy? Yes, you can. So it's somewhat fragmented, and the fragmentation or the walls that are kind of popping up in terms of access to those APIs are what is it that you want to do necessarily, okay, to prevent you and or allow you from doing that. Now, the intersecting technologies, the other aspect of the six technology accelerators is, and as humans, we always think in binary fashion, black or white, okay? And each new wave of technology, now the latest is generative AI, okay? And all of the focus, all the investment, all the IT budget, the business side rallies around the newest shiny toy in the toy box. Okay, but if you look over the course of time with technology shifts and paradigm, it was never one technology moving everything forward at light speed. It was a convergence. It was a new technology built upon foundations of previous technology and converging with it as a shift. You look at the internet browser and how we consume information from green screens and terminals to the early days of dial-up and AOL online, okay, and us getting frustrated and saying, well, I'll jump in my car, this is too slow, to now our expectations are fueled and reinforced by the pandemic 24/7 instantaneously. Okay, but that's not one technology that came on the horizon yesterday and then the day later we were able to do that. It was a convergence of all of those accelerators. Now, granted, some more mature than others, so all six of those accelerators don't necessarily or won't necessarily converge, but there's certainly a pattern of some of them merging together, converging together to solve some of the industry's biggest problems, to meet consumer demand. That's the point. So.
Mhm. What is I mean, when we talk about open APIs and so on, and we talked about all that complexity, you mentioned yourself, you started talking about the mainframe.
Right.
I imagine there's quite a bit of legacy technology still in financial services, definitely in the big banks. Now, open APIs and then the mainframe, it almost seems like it's the opposite, right? It seems like there's a sense that there's going to be a lot of friction. What do you see as friction to getting to an open API kind of world that maybe you want, but then there's all the legacy technology that you have.
Yeah, well, looking at that a couple of ways. So my former employer, IBM, and my company now, Kyndryl, is a X division of IBM, IBM Global Technology Services. And a while ago, they came up with a way of looking at this where you have systems of engagement at the front end where the consumer is. So that's the mobile device, the endpoint, the edge. You have systems of interaction, okay, and that's connecting from an integration perspective, the endpoint from a consumption model perspective. What's that consumer trying to do and interact with the data that's needed to fulfill the process? Okay, and then you have systems of record. Where's the treasure trove of data, the the crown jewels, okay, in terms of systems of record, and that's the mainframe. Okay, and weaving those together from an orchestration and integration perspective is what's desired. Okay, but the systems of record is where the insights are. Okay, and in many banks, that's where the CIF is, the customer information facility, typically on a DB2 or Atabas database on the mainframe. Okay, and then you have the product information master. All of the products in financial services, that's in another database on the mainframe. So you've got, 80, 90% of the insights. What's the customer doing in terms of transaction? What products are they looking at and working with and they own or buying? And then you have systems in the middle, interaction, that are churning that, okay, serving that information up, the API integration, open APIs. Okay, and then you have the endpoint, and ideally they all want to do it from their mobile device or internet browser at a minimum. Okay, and the challenge is the code base on the back end. You've got mainframes written in COBOL. Okay, but this is not insurmountable. We work with a number of partners. Okay, and depending on what the client wants to do, Okay. And, banks are in this journey of, I'd like to come off the mainframe because the MIPS costs are killing me in terms of cost. And I want to go to Azure or AWS or Google. They can't because of regulatory concerns based on the consumption model. Okay. So you have this bifurcation of strategies: integrate to, integrate with, or come off the mainframe in a transition type way. And partners fill the gaps to all three of those. There's companies out there that do uh, COBOL to Java API runbook conversions. Okay, and there's
No, sounds good.
code refactoring companies. So all kinds of stuff is out there to make that work. Yep.
What's the nirvana? So I'm thinking about is like, for example, at Workato. So we recently got a new a customer visa, and they have. I guess you can call it an open API. They have a developer.visa.com, which is basically the APIs to their products. They have these things like virtual payment cards and so on. But then what they were realizing is that just having the API, I mean, it's necessary, but in terms of adoption, you still got to be a developer to use it. And so they started using an orchestration platform like Workato to actually build solutions that now basically go over and work together with the finance systems of their customers. So if a company wants to use the Visa payment card, virtual payment card within procurement, they can actually, through a Workato process, tie into the SAP or Oracle Financials or whatever it might be on the other side and tie it together with their with the Visa APIs and do so actually in a very in a low code fashion. Is that something that you would say that's interesting? That's kind of where
Yeah.
you would like these open APIs to go?
Yeah, but it's going to vary too. And a while ago, my former employer put out, kind of a strategy playbook on API monetization. Okay. And that's exactly what it's about. API monetization, a lot of ways to consume and provide and serve up APIs. And it ties very much to your business strategy and what you want to do with them. Okay. Are you looking to attract stickiness to your platform by opening up your APIs? Is it a freemium model? Are you going to charge developers? Or are you going to charge them, you know, to consume the APIs? There's all kinds of studies back and forth with the major credit card companies, Visa and MasterCard, namely, that have embarked down this path, where they've opened up their APIs. Okay. But in some cases, adoption wasn't as great as they forecasted. Okay. Well, that could drive revenue, okay, and stickiness to Visa payment rails as an example. But, there's geographies and demographics that use alternative payment rails.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
So
I get it. I think
yeah, so it very, very much depends on the business strategy and what you're trying to do, okay, and the open API model, and looking at it from that perspective. And a lot of customers, and I think a lot of businesses don't go in depth in that regard. They assume, to some degree, well, we have 80% of the market share that's out there, so we'll open up these APIs for stickiness. But I think it's a bit more detailed and refined in terms of segmentation that you need to look at. Yeah.
okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, and it
So
depends
look,
too. It depends on your market. Okay. I mean, if you're North America only versus North America and Europe or emerging markets, of course, that's going to differ on your open API strategy, right?
no, makes sense. Makes sense. So look, I think it almost feels to me we're like already in the middle of it. But the second the second topic of the book, like going from processes where it was really about growth mindset. When people talk about automations, often enough they just talk about, well, taking the same processes that you have and just replacing people with robots, kind of like the very almost like back office type automation. When we at Workato think about automation, and we really think about innovation. What can you do? How can you take a process? How can you refine it? How can you apply some of these technology accelerators that you also write about to maybe make that process better. Again, I feel like with open APIs, with that kind of that ecosystem mindset in financial services that you highlighted, I think we're already in the midst of it. But maybe just talking about your decades of experience, what processes have you really seen addressed where the digital technology can make the most, can kind of create the biggest benefits? Is it around customer experience? Is it around productivity? Is it? I mean, you alluded a little bit to data. I'm just curious, like your sense of where the biggest potential is.
Yeah, I mean, just like a P&L and balance sheet, it's the top half of the fraction and the bottom, grow revenue and operational efficiency. And, the whole intersection of automation with AI, okay, is really around robotic process automation. Okay. And that trend, really started in back office and operational efficiency behind the enterprise wall. Okay. I mean, number of proof points throughout my career, I've seen this play out where a company is international and for VAT compliance reporting, okay, to make sure that they're not overpaying or underpaying on a country by country basis that they're operating in. Well, typically, over the decades, that was done on spreadsheets. Okay. And then those spreadsheets kind of morphed into macro workbooks that are tied together to roll up. Okay. Good use case for robotic process automation. Okay. And building that out and automating the VAT reporting compliance perspective. Okay. Um, IT budgeting, FP&A, these are all good use cases for operations for a business. Okay. To reduce costs and gain operational efficiencies. Okay. But now with the advent of the consumer demand and learning more about your consumers and connecting your traditional business, the market economy with the real economy, the consumer economy, enterprises have been left on their heels a bit in terms of consumer behavior using their mobile devices, and they can't get 24/7 real-time insights from that. So a lot of opportunities coming up. I'm actually speaking at a conference next week on this revenue generation through AI. Okay. And what's interesting about this is the whole aspect of generative AI as a subset of AI overall. There's certainly an automation and process orchestration angle to this though too, because if you think about lead generation, okay, and what are customers doing on the internet, okay, I saw a very interesting, fascinating use case from a company that we're talking to, where the client is a small boutique capital markets firm, okay, and the owner and founder, okay, just released a book within the last 6 months with Tony Robbins about business strategy for consumers to get into alternative asset investment classes, not necessarily crypto, but variations of traditional asset classes. The firm, based on the PR angle that the book is being written with Tony Robbins and the president of the capital markets firm, is anticipating 10 to 20x increase on lead gen volume once that book comes out, because it's connecting a known thought leader, okay, to the owner and founder of this capital markets firm, and they feel that their existing email, call tracking, lead gen processes that they have now are too manual to book trades, okay, and they need to automate that. And then with AI and automation software, top of funnel lead gen is very, very, very much so accelerated for them. And the company proved this out for them in a proof of concept, and they were astounded. Okay. So just a very interesting, very current real life example of what's going on out there. Okay. Where, the whole automation as a subset of AI perspective is no longer reserved to the back office or operational efficiency.
No, this is fascinating. So I know obviously you live financial services, but I can tell you we have a customer example here at Workato, which I think mirrors what you just talked about identically. It's from a different industry. So this is aircraft servicing. Okay, so this is a little company. So think about your capital markets company. This is a little company doing, I mean, little in the grand scheme of things. I mean, reasonably sized, but they service aircrafts, and they did a partnership, not with Tony Robbins, but with Honeywell, which does aircraft parts.
Big player, yeah.
Like a big partner, and very similar. They were all happy about it, and then they realized within a week they had 30,000 emails coming in. They're like, "Oh my God, what are we going to do now?" And actually used a combination of the Workato orchestration platform and generative AI to actually tame all of these 30,000 emails, and then prioritize them. Find the needle in the haystack. Categorize them, find the needle in the haystack, the ones that they're almost like orders coming through that they got to really jump on. And I think these are things that without Gen AI, it would have been really hard. I mean, you could have used traditional text analysis and so on. But I think now with Gen AI, there's a phenomenal opportunity to do that stuff. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
very nice. Very nice. Yep. So tell me a little bit. You talked about capital markets. Is there, when I think about financial services obviously an industry that has many different players. There are retail banks. There's more. You mentioned capital markets, private equity, wealth management, all of the above. How do you think about the segmentation and maybe more importantly, like where do you think the early adopters are for the kind of technologies that we're talking about, or maybe for that new automation mindset?
Yeah, I still think it's, from an early adopter perspective, it's the traditional owners of that consumption model, which are the big banks, the tier one banks, okay? Because they have to, okay? They've got to reduce costs to stay relevant. They know they're getting disrupted at the fringes, okay? So, on a lot of the major players out there, the JP Morgan Chases, the Bank of Americas, the Wells Fargos, I like to, define them more as technology companies with a banking license. They've got hundreds and hundreds of data scientists and AI researchers on staff in quantum computing, blockchain. Okay. So they've already seen what they have to do to survive. Okay. The mid-tier players are getting disrupted probably a bit more so. Okay. And then when you go into segment bifurcation and specialization, it's completely open. Okay. So private capital and lending, private equity. Okay. These operations, surprisingly for the most part are run on spreadsheets. Okay. And as I'm kind of, summarizing, in terms of a quote, one gentleman told me recently within the last 2 weeks, we're all making too much money to slow down and stop and build out automation and AI, okay, to automate a lot of what we do, okay? Tremendous market opportunity in some of these subsegments. Another relevant contextual example, I just shared a post from Wells Fargo where they invested $50 million into a company called Targeted Lending, okay, that is a niche specialty finance, okay, so lease financing for heavy aviation, things of this nature, okay, that's a very niche market. There's a lot of money obviously exchanged there, but on a volume by volume basis, it's not bread and butter like retail lending, okay, so a traditional tier one bank is not going to develop automation, AI, orchestration around that offering. But to stay relevant in the game, they may partner or invest in a company that's building out a platform to handle that function, which is quite interesting. Yeah.
This is fascinating. And it actually, it makes me think about, the last part of the new automation mindset is we talked about the scale mindset. All right. And scale, I want to tell a little story here just for people to grasp what we really mean by scale, because, I talked to a CIO and they had just just purchased Workato and went on it. And he told me, it's like, well, Marcus, we got Workato because our existing technology, they had an integration tool, it doesn't scale. And so I was thinking to myself, that's interesting. It's like, I get it. It's not like we like that traditional technology, but from a data volume, from a data scale perspective, I mean, I felt like it actually does scale. So I asked him, I said, like, tell me more, like why? Help me define. He said, like, no, Marcus, that is not the scale I'm talking about. It's not about handling all these data volumes. When I talk about scale, it's around how do I scale that across my company? How do I get people involved? How do I get more people? He said, like, I think we have that challenge that technology is too complex, that too few people can actually use it. It's got to be a developer. And then he says it always comes to this, even if I have hundreds of developers, I still need to collaborate with the business side. And if they can't understand what we're actually doing, we might actually take 100 developers and point them in the wrong direction. So he said, like, if we simplify technology and we get that, the interaction between the people who need the technology and the people who build the technology, we get that facilitated easier. I think we're going to make a big step forward. I'm just curious, financial service, does that resonate for you? I mean, are you seeing that in terms of, and then how do you think about that?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it definitely resonates in terms of change management, which is typically an afterthought in organizations. I'm in discussions now with one of our clients now. They want to take a traditional software offering that's geared to the tier one banks, okay, and they want to move into adjacent markets in financial services to offer the product, but to scale, okay, sure, there's technical ways to scale the offering, okay, but can your organization scale, okay, from a change mindset, and you're going to move into different adjacent markets that your employees are not ready necessarily to service yet, not only from a coding and development perspective on the technology side, but a regulatory risk and compliance perspective, a process perspective. There's nuances, okay, as you go into these subsegments or adjacent segments of financial services that are not all boilerplate and the same, and that needs to be factored in terms of that scaling and growth model. Absolutely.
And there's this ongoing discussion around, if you think about your IT capabilities or development capabilities and how you structure them more centralized for the whole company or more decentralized. I imagine like one of these new initiatives might actually be better structured as a decentralized team on its own. Or how do you think about that?
Again, going back to binary thinking, I don't think binary. So I'm all over quantum computing, in the sense that the output can be 0, 1, or both. Okay. So that's how I think, living in the gray. Okay. Life is never about absolutes, but it's how you navigate between them and through them and with them. So, another course, the certificate hanging on, one of the certificates hanging on my wall was by the grandfather or father of disruptive strategy, Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School. And I went through his course. Okay. Absolutely fascinating. And directly answering your question contextually, it's about focusing on your core, what you do well. Okay. But being able to service adjacent markets and expanded capabilities to grow and scale on the edge, so you don't get disrupted. So it's a hybrid approach, okay? Don't abandon the core. That was a key tenet or principle of what he always espoused, but look at, where you're being disrupted, okay? And where as a secondary service or offering, either through partnering or building up a secondary capability, okay, you can pivot in that direction when needed. Gave a lot of relative examples in terms of, playbook of customer references that have been on both sides of the equation, good and bad. Kodak, Harley Davidson,
We all
Coke,
know Kodak. Yep.
yep,
Yep.
Coke, and a Blockbuster, you know, waited way too long and bet on the rental model, people going into to stores and outfits. Okay. And then they slowly started to move into the Netflix direction. Well, it was too late, you
Hmm.
know.
So you gotta experiment on the edge, and you gotta preserve the core. Yeah, I
Right.
think that makes
Yeah.
total
And
sense.
then, it
Makes
back
total
to the
sense.
example we talked about earlier in the discussion. So, the traditional house of the bank is being nipped on one flank by the big tech players. Okay. On the other side by fintech players. But what's the common way into that house? Where are both of them attacking the traditional industry? It's through the internet browser and the endpoint, mobile. Okay. So your services need to be internet and mobile first, in my view. If you're not, then you may as well prepare to get packed up and close shop. That
No,
extreme.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Bill, this was fascinating. I mean, it really, I think, gave me a good view of financial services. I grew up in the telco industry, so I know that industry very well. There's actually quite a bit of similarities. I mean, it's getting disrupted as well.
I was in China. We talked about earlier. I think I was vice president corporate strategy at Huawei. My responsibility was to grow presence in global banking and financial markets. So perfect opportunity as a thesis to drive out what I'm saying here. Merging of industries, telco. Everybody's using their mobile device to have mobile banking services. So definitely from that angle, and you'll see that too. More business models, more industries are converging where they don't stay in their own swim lane anymore. It's not just embedded finance or financial services. Okay, it could be telco in government public sector. It could be telco in 5G in manufacturing or healthcare. We can talk about this for another hour on the phone, right? So
Totally, totally. Well, listen, I want to thank you for making the time. I know you're busy. You got conferences to prepare for and so on. So really, really appreciate that. I think that was super valuable. I don't know if is there anything. I'm just curious in this interview, something in financial services that really matters that we haven't talked about. Is there anything you feel like people should know about financial services, or just curious?
no, I think we pretty much covered everything. The key themes are, convergence for sure. Okay. And I think, financial services compared to some of the industry verticals have latched on to that premise. Okay. That it's not one technology. Okay. That they're banking on to move the needle forward. It's a convergence play of a number of technologies. And their budgets, looking at AI, automation, and these other technologies surrounding them, they'll have a short list. Okay, it won't be all six as an example, but they see the value, for example, of open APIs, orchestration, automation, AI. Okay, and then other things coming up on the horizon to move that forward for sure.
Bill, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Markus, for having me again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you like what you heard, we do have a special offer for you. If you share this or any other episode of the podcast on LinkedIn with the hashtag TNAM for the new automation mindset, that's TNAM, our team will reach out to you and make sure you get a free hardcover copy of the book by our Workato CEO, Vijay Tella. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.